Namaskar, I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. Welcome to Global Scan. All the international news and developments of the week in the next half an hour. Donald Trump became the third president in the US history to be formally impeached and now faces a trial in the Senate. Meanwhile, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson chaired his first cabinet meeting and after returning to power. On the cards is a controversial legislation related to BDS. We'll tell you what that stands for in the show up ahead. COP25 summit concluded. Leading emitters are not doing enough to tackle the climate change challenge. Former Pakistani dictator Pervez Musharraf was sentenced to death by the court, while United Nations appealed to the world to treat all refugees with compassion. All that and more. First, the headlines. Donald Trump becomes third president in American history to be impeached. Majority of representatives vote in favor of two articles of impeachment drawn up by House Democrats. Trump accused of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, both related to Ukraine scandal. UK's Boris Johnson welcomes new lawmakers to Westminster, chairs first cabinet meeting of his new government, seeks to speed up approval by Parliament of his withdrawal agreement with the European Union and start ploughing money into health, education and police. Pope Francis ends secrecy rule on child sexual abuse in Catholic Church. Pontifical secrecy no more an excuse for church officials to refuse to share information. Tourists in Paris unable to visit the city's most iconic landmark, Eiffel Tower, shuts down for second time as workers in France go on strike. Workers protest against government's plan to raise the retirement age to 64, among many other grievances. Pakistan's former dictator Pervez Musharraf, sentenced to death in high treason case for subverting the constitution in 2007, becomes the first military ruler to receive the capital punishment in the country's history. Let's now begin with news from Americas. And it happened. US President Donald Trump was impeached this week by the House of Representatives. The Democrat-led House on both articles of impeachment against President Trump. First article accused President Trump of abuse of power. The second article of impeachment charged the Republican president with obstructing the Congress investigation. President Trump is impeached, not ousted, mind you. Trial now shifts to the powerful Senate, where Trump's Republican Party has majority.
It's a major setback for US President. Donald Trump becomes the third US President in history to be impeached by House of Representatives, setting up trial in the Senate. The House voted on two charges. The first charge is abuse of power, stemming from Trump's alleged attempt to pressure Ukraine to announce investigation into his Democratic political rival Joe Biden. The second charge is obstruction of Congress because the president allegedly refused to cooperate with the impeachment inquiry, withholding documentary evidence and barring his key aides from giving evidence. The House action sets the stage for trial next month in Republican-controlled Senate on whether to convict him and remove him from office. The House will select lawmakers known as managers to present the case against Trump at the Senate trial. House Democrats say most of the managers are likely to come from Judiciary Committee and possibly from Intelligence Committee that led the investigation. US Chief Justice John Roberts will preside over the trial. House managers will present their case against Trump, and President's legal team will respond. Senators will act as jurors. A trial could involve testimony from witnesses and a grueling schedule in which proceedings occur 6 days a week for as many as 6 weeks.
Chief Justice Roberts could exercise a great deal of power. He could issue subpoenas, he can make rulings, and his rulings would have to be overturned by 51 senators, so Republicans would have to hold their lines pretty strongly.
The first of articles accused Trump of abusing his power by pressurizing Ukraine to investigate political rival Joe Biden, a leading contender for 2020 Democratic presidential nomination, as well as a discredited theory promoted by President and beneficial to Russia that Democrats conspired with Ukraine to meddle in 2016 election. The second article accuses Trump of obstruction of Congress by directing administration officials and agencies not to comply with lawful House subpoenas for testimony and documents related to impeachment. But Donald Trump has denied wrongdoing. No president in 243-year history of the United States have been removed from office by impeachment. It requires a 2/3 majority in the 100-member Senate, meaning at least 20 Republicans would have to join Democrats in voting against Trump, and none have indicated they will. With Bureau Inputs, Global Scan Desk, DD India.
And allow me to now simplify what has happened so far and what lies ahead vis-a-vis President Donald Trump's impeachment. So House of Representatives have voted. What happens next? Let's just do a quick summary of what has happened, what lies forward. So House of Representatives voted to pass the 2 articles of impeachment, and these articles were both approved and passed by the House of Representatives. The first charge, abuse of power, that Trump pressurized Ukraine to settle scores with political opponent Joe Biden. Second charge, obstructing the course of the investigation that was undertaken by the Congress during the impeachment process. On both accounts, the House approved the impeachment. Now, President Trump is clearly angry. He says it's an assault on America. He says to the people, these Democrats are not after me, they're coming after you. President Trump is impeached by historic votes on both the counts, the charges that I mentioned. He is impeached. Now the Senate, the powerful Senate, 100-member House, is going to hold the impeachment trial after the impeachment has taken place by the House of Representatives. Now Republican Party, that's where Donald Trump belongs to. Republican Party has the strength in the Senate, in the 100-member Senate. Republican Party has the strength, and to impeach, to remove the US President, 2/3 of the majority is required by the Democrats, by the House, which seems like very difficult. No US President in the history of United States has ever been ousted through impeachment. There are people who've been impeached but not ousted. So it's going to be unlikely for Donald Trump to be impeached given the status of the Senate. Andrew Johnson, 1868 is when he was impeached. Bill Clinton, more recently, 1998, they were impeached, but they were later acquitted by the Senate. A lot of experts say perhaps Donald Trump is going to meet a similar end. Let's now move to news from Europe. After the decisive win in the UK elections, Prime Minister Boris Johnson took charge, chaired his first cabinet meeting, his key priority being delivery of Brexit and also alongside ramp-up spending on health and social infrastructure. Anti-BDS legislation is likely to be passed by the new government. If cleared, it will ban universities and local councils from organizing boycotts, disinvestment and sanctions. That's an acronym for BDS, against other countries, which is most often used against Israel for its treatment of Palestinians.
After securing a commanding majority in last week's vote, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson welcomed 109 new Conservative lawmakers to Parliament on 16th December, promising to honour his election-winning pledges to get Brexit done as soon as possible and boost funding for the State Health Service. He held the first meeting of senior ministers in his new government on 13th December.
There is a huge agenda of delivering social justice, of addressing every problem from social care to homelessness, to levelling up and uniting across our country with better infrastructure, better education and technology. That's what we want to do. We're Conservatives, we believe in extending opportunity across the whole of the United Kingdom, and that's what we're going to devote ourselves to. Thank you all very much for your efforts. Thank you for what you've done, and I'm proud to say today that Saj has just passed me some, the risk of sounding more North Korean than normal. Saj has passed me some good economic news. That unemployment is up again. Employment is up again. Unemployment is down again. The economy continues to be robust, but we will now take steps to strengthen it further.
Johnson will seek to speed up approval by Parliament of his withdrawal agreement with European Union and start flowing money into health, education and the police. He also proclaimed that he will lead a people's government and repay the public's trust by getting Brexit done. Meanwhile, the new Conservative government is all set to pass a law restricting local authorities from participating in the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement reportedly. In his party's pre-election manifesto last month, Prime Minister Boris Johnson of Britain mentioned the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement or BDS as one of a number of things that undermine community cohesion. Global Scam Desk, DD India.
Moving on, Pope Francis announced sweeping changes to the way Roman Catholic Church deals with cases of sexual abuse of minors, abolishing the rule of pontifical secrecy that previously covered them. Advocates for the victims of sex abuse scandal that has rocked the church for nearly 2 decades applauded the move as being long overdue, but said it had to be applied broadly. 2 documents issued by the Pope back practices that have been in place in some countries, particularly in the United States, such as reporting suspicion of sex abuse to civil authorities with the required by the law. The documents which put the practices into universal church law also forbid imposing an obligation of silence on those who report sex abuse or allege that they have been a victim. The lifting of pontifical secrecy in sex abuse investigation was a key demand by church leaders, including Scicluna and German Cardinal Reinhard Marx at a summit on sexual abuse held at the Vatican in February. The Eiffel Tower in France was closed for the second time on December 17 due to a staff strike, which is part of the ongoing nationwide strikes in France over proposed changes to pension reforms. Screens outside the popular tourist destination informed tourists that the tower was closed, with visitors only able to access the walking area below. Previously scheduled tours were cancelled. Tourists attempting to buy tickets for the popular site were turned away by the staff. The strikes are part of a series of actions set to unfold across France as unions try to bring new momentum to the general strike that began almost 2 weeks ago and has crippled France's public transport network. French President Emmanuel Macron has said he wants to streamline the Byzantine state pension system with its tangle of special privileges and use of incentives to encourage people to work until 64 instead of current average retirement age of 62. Let's talk about the COP25. Now, the COP25 climate summit started, it stretched, it ended in Madrid. Let's now find out what really happened at this climate meet. We're talking about COP25 that took place in Madrid. More than 190 nations and blocs were represented. Big nations, United States, China, and also smaller island nations were represented in this COP25 meeting. I'm going to just talk about briefly what had happened at the meeting. It was, in fact, one of the longest climate talks. It stretched to 2 weeks. It was extended by another 2 days because there was no agreement that was reached. It was a compromise deal. Nations could not come to a common understanding of the climate challenge. No agreement on global carbon market. Now, this is an important one. This issue was supposed to be settled down. Carbon credits from previous years to carbon targets of the years ahead. That's the agreement that the countries could not reach to. Over 70 countries commit to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. With some of the achievements that COP25 did mention. Another one was that island states together have committed to achieve neutrality, carbon neutrality by the year 2030. Carbon neutrality would mean the carbon that you produce and the carbon that you remove from the atmosphere. But major emitters, and that's the challenge that really the world faces. Major emitters, United States, China, Brazil, are not doing enough to curb their emissions. US, in fact, has already said that it's walking out of the Paris deal. So the big nations who are causing pollutions, they're not doing enough to check climate change. Low ambition of the talks, the big countries, the leaders that had come, was quite an opposite to the passionate plea by the activists. There were protests everywhere. Greta Thunberg, the leading teenage protester, was also there. She was holding a protest in Madrid as well and protests across the world. The challenge is that the world is far from meeting the Paris pledges and Antonio Guterres, the UN chief, in the beginning of the conference had said that we're not enough doing to meet the Paris climate accords, but even that will not be enough. But now the challenge now shifts to next year. United Kingdom will host the conference in Glasgow next year, and it'll be something to be watched out for whether the countries now can move above their differences and come to an understanding as far as climate change challenge is concerned. Secretary General Antonio Guterres of the United Nations stressed that the international community should take action against the root causes of the refugee problems and re-establish respect for refugees. Speaking at a press conference during the ongoing Global Refugee Forum, Guterres said it is the right time to ensure that the human rights of refugees are upheld, to re-establish the integrity of the international refugee protection regime, and to address the root causes that lead people to flee in the first place.
At a time when the right to asylum is under assault, when so many borders and doors are being closed to refugees, when even child refugees can be divided from their families, we need to reaffirm the human rights of refugees. And the Global Compact on Refugees gives us the blueprint. And this forum is an opportunity to give the implementation of the Compact energy and dynamism by drawing together the expertise, ideas, resources, commitments and new forms of collaboration that will drive it forward. I urge you to be bold and concrete in the pledges you will make. This is a moment for ambition. It is a moment to jettison a model of support that too often left refugees for decades with their lives on hold, confined to camps, just scraping by, unable to flourish or contribute.
The latest UN figure showed that today more than 70 million people are forcibly displaced, double the level of 20 years ago. Next up, news from Asia. Hundreds of protesters took to the streets of Pakistan on December 18th against the death sentence handed out to former President Pervez Musharraf by an anti-terrorism court. A Pakistani court sentenced Musharraf in absentia on December 17th on treason charges stemming from his imposition of a state of emergency in 2007. He becomes the first military ruler to receive the capital punishment in the country's history. In Karachi, around 200 supporters of Musharraf's All Pakistani Muslim League APML party gathered in the main market square, carrying banners praising Musharraf and chanting slogans. Musharraf, 76 years old, is the first former army chief to be charged with treason in Pakistan and has said the powerful military helped him get out of the country. Attorney General for Pakistan Anwar Mansoor Khan said high treason case against the former president had been void from the beginning and questioned the death penalty, which was given in absentia. The Attorney General's remarks came during a joint news conference with the government's chief spokesperson Firdaus Ashik Awan in Islamabad late on December 17th. In a strongly worded statement, the army has said that the ruling had caused pain and anguish in the ranks and added that the due legal process seems to have been ignored. Students and teachers of Punjab University marched through the streets of Lahore in support of the Pakistan Army and Musharraf. Smaller protests were reported from various cities across Pakistan. The daughter of jailed Uyghur rights activist Ilham Tohti accepted a European Parliament prize on his behalf on December 18th, urging lawmakers in an address not to be complicit in Chinese persecution of Uyghur people. Tohti's daughter, Jiwar Ilham, called on the lawmakers to use their laws to hold Chinese government officials accountable, adding it was not about fighting China, but about protecting human rights. EU Parliament President David Sassoli called the immediate and unconditional release of Tohti, an economist who was jailed for life in China in 2014 on separatism charges, a decision that was widely denounced in the Western capitals. China has come under increasing international scrutiny for cracking down on the Muslim Uyghur minority in its northwestly Xinjiang region. Beijing has said that Xinjiang is under threat from Islamist militants and separatists. It denies any mistreatment or mass internment, says that it is simply seeking to end extremism and violence through education. The €50,000 Sakharov Prize has been awarded annually since 1988 to individuals and organizations defending human rights and also fundamental freedoms of people. Moving on to news coming from Africa now. A Sudanese court convicted former President Omar al-Bashir on corruption charges on December 14th, sentenced him to 2 years detention in a reform facility. Is the first ruling against the ex-leader who was deposed by military in April following months of street protest against his 3-decade-long rule. The presiding judge said Bashir, 75-year-old, was being sent to a reform facility rather than a prison to account of his age. He also ordered the confiscation of millions of euros and Sudanese pounds found in Bashir's residence when he was toppled. Dressed in traditional white robes and a turban, Bashir watched silently from inside of a metal defendant's cage while the judge Al-Sadiq Abu Ibrahim read out the verdict. Dozens of Bashir supporters took to Khartoum streets after the trial, with many condemning the verdict as being political. His lead defense lawyer, Ahmed Ibrahim Al-Tahir, said that Bashir would appeal the verdict. Bashir's prosecution is a test of how fast and how far military and civilian authorities, now sharing power in Sudan, will act to overturn his legacy. Protests triggered by deepening economic crisis began to spread across Sudan. On December 19th, 2018, that was nearly 4 months later, a group of military generals removed Bashir from power and jailed him in Khartoum's Kobar prison, where he had incarcerated thousands of opponents of his repressive rule. Several other judicial cases have been also launched in Sudan against Bashir. In May, he was charged with incitement and involvement in the killing of protesters. And this week, he was summoned for questioning over his role in the 1989 military coup that brought him to power. Bashir is also wanted by the International Criminal Court, which issued arrest warrants against him in 2009, 2010 on charges of genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity in Sudan's restive Darfur region. Moving on, the wife of Zimbabwean Vice President Constantino Chiwenga was charged with trying to kill her husband when she appeared in court on December 16th. Prosecutors say Mary Mubayiwa tried to unplug Chiwenga's life support tubes in South African hospital in June. She was initially arrested on December 14th by the Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission, ZACC, on charges of fraud, money laundering and breaching exchange control rules, and is accused of illegally transferring about $900,000 to South Africa. She denies all the accusations against her. Her lawyer said she would seek bail at Zimbabwe's High Court. She was refused bail for the initial charges after prosecutors argued that she would flee the country or interfere with witnesses. The charges follow media reports that Mubayiwa and Chiwenga, who returned to Zimbabwe last month after 4 months in a Chinese hospital where he was later treated for a blocked esophagus, were set to go for a divorce. Prosecutors also told the court that Mubayiwa was being investigated for misusing US dollar allowances meant for her husband's security details. And now a quick roundup of all the important news coming in from across the world in Speed News.
Days after a volcano eruption killed several people on White Island, New Zealand police scaled down the search operation for 2 missing people, saying that the bodies may never be found. The official death toll from the eruption on White Island stands at 16. 6 bodies were retrieved from the island last week. A minute of silence was observed to mark 1 week of the eruption. The tribute was held at the exact moment of the eruption, which claimed 16 lives. Bushfires continue to devour thousands of hectares of land in Australia. Firefighters urge residents to evacuate areas near Gospers Mountain as a bushfire that has razed almost 4 lakh hectares approached residential areas. A dozen koala bears were rescued from the path of bushfires raging near Sydney as devastating blazes increasingly encroach on critical habitat. Protests rocked many cities of the world. In Colombia, protesters gathered outside the country's Congress against rumored economic reform plans. The protesters presented 13 demands, including actions to curb the murders of social activists and the implementation of the peace agreement. Protesters in Lebanon clashed with police demanding the overhaul of political crisis and the use of violence by the security forces. The clashes came after the much-delayed consultations to form a new cabinet needed to fix a deepening economic crisis. The United Nations envoy to Lebanon called for an investigation into alleged excessive force used against demonstrators after largely peaceful protests descended into violence at the weekend. Authorities in Argentina arrested Diego Vega Ibarra, a former Bolivian diplomat, after nearly 8 kilos of cocaine was reportedly found in a vehicle he was traveling in. Bolivian officials said their Argentine counterparts had stopped Ibarra's vehicle at a border region between the two countries after they noticed the car's spare tire was not in its correct place. Officials report that the drug have a street value upwards of $2 lakh.
Families of victims of a deadly shooting in Toronto last year filed a class action lawsuit against gun maker Smith & Wesson. The families alleged that the gun used in the rampage should have been equipped with smart technology that would have prevented it from being used. A 10-year-old girl and an 18-year-old woman were killed and 13 others were wounded when a man opened fire on a hustling stretch of Danforth Avenue in downtown Toronto. In Italy, around 54,000 people were evacuated from Brindisi as experts worked to defuse a World War II bomb. In what is being called the biggest peacetime evacuation in Italy, more than 60% of the city's residents forced to vacate a red zone in a radius of 1,617 meters from where the bomb was found. The city's airport, train station, 2 hospitals and a prison were shut down and evacuated as part of the operation. The British bomb is believed to have been dropped in the city in 1941. Representatives of Allies countries and Germany gathered in a small town in the Belgian Ardennes to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge, which was the bloodiest single engagement for US forces in World War II. Global Scan Desk, DD India.
And time now for all the action from the world of sports. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe hailed the completion of the national stadium built for the Tokyo 2020 Olympics at an inauguration ceremony at the Kengo-Kuma designed venue, praising the efforts to finish on schedule after an early setback. The stadium, built at a cost of $1.44 billion, will have the capacity of about 68,000 when it hosts the Olympic Games opening ceremony on July 24th. Real Madrid will play Manchester City in the Champions League round of 16, while holders Liverpool face Atletico Madrid. The draw on Monday brought up some fascinating ties with the heavyweight clashes between England and Madrid's top clubs. Arguably the pick of the bunch, the draw for this football season's Champions League was announced in a ceremony at the Swiss city of Nyon. 13 times winners Real Madrid on Monday were drawn against English champions Manchester City, while title holders Liverpool will face Atletico Madrid in the round of 16. Let's now find out what's creating buzz in the world of entertainment and cinema.
Side of me has always been there. And now it's awake.
The Star Wars trilogy came to an end with the final film, The Rise of Skywalker, being premiered in Hollywood on Monday. Not only does it mark the end of the trilogy, which started in 2015 with The Force Awakens, but also marks the end of the Skywalker saga, which began with the very first Star Wars film, A New Hope, back in 1977.
I know who you are. It was a magical place. But something went wrong. Since then, no one can get in or out.
Disney's magical saga Frozen 2 has now entered $1 billion club. With this, Frozen 2 has become the 6th Disney movie to enter the club. Directed by Chris Buck and Jennifer Lee, the film is a sequel of 2013 original film Frozen.
Seems like Elsa.
There's this voice. Voice? What does that mean?
After 25 years of its release, Mariah Carey's festive classic All I Want for Christmas Is You has for the first time reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. According to Billboard, this is Carey's 19th song to top the Hot 100, and she holds the record for the most #1s for any solo artist. Global Scan Desk, DD India.
And as Australia recorded its hottest day this week with an average maximum temperature of 41.9 degrees Celsius, people took to the water across the nation to escape the heat. We now leave you with these images of how Australians cope with the weather and also have fun. See you next week. Goodbye for now.
Come on, little sweetie, just take some food. Come on, be good food. Come on. Come on. Yes, get them started.